Collegium is on the topic of psychosis stimulation, but I don't have time, of course, to go into that. Today on the topic, it is indeed hallucinations and the existential crisis, and maybe one thing it's interesting to know is that psychosis is considered as a reality disorder. So this conference about reality is like... Okay, so what I'm asking myself is what hallucinations are from different perspectives of reality. Having hallucinations is often seen as one of the key symptoms of mental health problems, in particular to those with schizophrenia. And in the DSM-4, hallucinations are defined as followed: a sensory perception that has the compelling sense of reality of a true perception, but that occurs without external stimulation of the relevant sensory organ. I ask myself, what is a true perception? How do we know if there really is no external stimulation? And I think these questions become interesting when recent research shows that people diagnosed with schizophrenia, and schizophrenia is like chronic psychosis, are not fooled by optical illusions. And that sometimes, and I quote, their vision is actually more accurate than non-sufferers. So if a hallucination is experienced as a compelling reality by those who seem to have a better grip on what is actually out there in time and space, it becomes, in my opinion, imperative to look at hallucinations from the perspective of alternative concepts of reality. And we might wonder if the concept of hallucination in itself even has the right to exist. So in this paper, in order to question this ontology of hallucinations in relation to concept of reality, I will look at hallucinations through three frameworks. One, hallucinations as a symptom of mental illness, obviously. Two, hallucinations in relation to the radical constructivist idea of the invented reality. And three, hallucinations in relation to the concept of living in a computer simulation. I hope to use these frameworks to build an alternative model for the mad as time travelers, based on concepts of the universe as a quantum computer. So this, and I know it's highly speculative, but I feel free to do this at this conference. This might alter the ontology of hallucinations, understood as seeing and hearing things that are not actually there, in a way that might function as a tool in breaking through stigma in order to question one of society's last taboos. So, hallucinations as a symptom of mental illness. Now, the most common hallucinations are auditory. And it is thought that about 70% of people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia hear voices. Accounts of hearing voices have been recorded for over 2,000 years. Well-known voice hearers of history are Socrates, Mohammed, Pythagoras, and Joan of Arc. And it is believed that today actually about 5% of our population hear voices on a regular basis. And it was the Dutch psychiatrist Marius Room who discovered that large numbers of Dutch citizens hear voices without even needing psychiatric treatment. Richard Bental's book Madness Explained in 2004 was inspired by a conversation with Marius Room, and it made a strong contribution to shattering the modern myths surrounding the experience of hallucinations as a symptom of madness. And I quote, "I really like your research on hallucinations, Richard, but the trouble is you want to cure hallucinations, whereas I want to liberate them. I think that they are like the homosexuals in the 1950s. They need a liberation, not cure." So Bental's book went on to collect compelling arguments that psychiatric diagnoses are in essence meaningless, especially when it comes to madness, in particular as symptoms such as hallucinations occur in the sane as well as the insane. Now, accounts of hallucination experiences are increasingly being taken seriously, finally. Before that, there was thought that there's nothing interesting in a hallucination to investigate. And in his book, Psychosis Without Psychiatry, the psychologist Thomas Pope reports on people who survive without psychiatric treatment. And he describes how hallucinations seem to function more like dreams do, as a means to help deal with life. As he suggests, bad hallucinations should be regarded as having a bad dream, interfering in a waking state, making psychosis just another state of human consciousness, like a fever of the imagination attempting to heal the human psyche. Seeing madness as part of human nature is a big step. But in today's world, the social representation of a homeless person is still more acceptable than a chronic mental patient. If the fear of madness is a much bigger problem than madness itself, how can we find ways to deal with madness? Why is our society so poorly equipped in dealing with it? How to be less afraid of what is that natural occurrence of human nature? So in order to develop concepts to help answering these questions, I thought it might be useful to take a look at alternative ideas about this nature of our reality. And radical constructivism might be such a framework to look at. So, hallucinations and radical constructivism. Radical constructivist theory advocates the view that any so-called reality, in the most immediate and concrete sense, is the construction of those who believe they have discovered and investigated it. In other words, there is a high probability we have created the world we live in, but for some reason have become unaware of the fact that we have created it. This has led us to believe that our invented reality exists as an objective reality outside of ourselves, making it the fundament of our worldview. This means that from a radical constructivist point of view, one might see a hallucination as a reality that is no more real or unreal than other perceptions. From this perspective, the whole world could be an hallucination, rendering the distinction between sanity and insanity problematic. Radical constructivist ideas are not new. In 1836, Pierre de Bourmont was a Catholic, believed in more than what an eye can see and an ear can hear. He objected to subjective experience being treated as merely a play of the imagination, and somehow less real and valuable than objective perception. For Pierre de Bourmont, secretary of the Société Médico-Physiologique, is a very important man, for him too, hallucinations were in themselves not a sign of madness, at least not any more than thinking and remembering are. He implied that hallucinations were ordinary mental functions which can indicate impairment of reason like any other. There is only an error, he says, if we say that we should not have experiences without external objects. We should not have an overly vivid imagination. So, we might wonder if the error of ignoring such states of consciousness lies at the core of why they can be so nightmarish, why people suffer from so much terror. Now, how this nightmare begins might be better understood if we look at the conceptual division between a first-order and a second-order reality. Paul Watzlawick uses the often quoted example of gold to explain the difference. Now, gold has certain physical properties that everyone agrees upon, and this is called the first-order reality. The second-order reality contains qualities such as the value, the subjective aspect of gold, which has nothing to do with the physical properties of the metal, but are attributed to it by human beings. Now, when we feel that our ideas of the second order fit in with the ideas of the first order, we are assured and we can cope fairly with adversities. However, if these two worlds collide, when our constructions no longer fit, we fall into despair, we develop fear, psychosis, or thoughts of suicide. Thus, it becomes important to think about how to stop making this error of judging realities and focus on ways of making sure that we have ideas that allows us to make the two orders fit together, to make our reality fit together. So, hallucinations and computer simulations. The second conceptualization of reality that might be useful to look at might be the idea that we are living in a computer simulation. Now, in his infamous 1973 lecture on constructing a reality, Heinz von Förster paraphrases cognition as computing a reality or computing descriptions of a reality onto cognition, being computations of computations, in an ongoing cycle. He does this by using experiments as an example in which we see or hear what is not there, or in which we do not see or hear what is there, unless coordination of sensation and movement allows us to grasp what appears to be there. That's that fitting again.